Under the frost-kissed moon, a single drop of blood froze into a ruby pendant, whispering of wounds that time could not mend. The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Silverfang Mountains, carrying the scent of pine and regret as Elara stumbled into the exile's embrace. She had no wolf within her, no feral instinct to guide her paws through the snow, no savage growl to ward off the encroaching night. Born an Omega without the gift of the beast, she was little more than a shadow in the eyes of her pack, a fragile vessel cracked by the world's indifference. The rejection had come swiftly, like a blade through silk, cast out by her alpha mate on the eve of the blood moon, accused of weakness that would taint their lineage. "You are no mate of mine," he had snarled, his eyes cold as the iron chains that bound lesser souls. They left her at the border of the territory, stripped of warmth and kin, with only the clothes on her back and the faint pulse of her human heart to defy the freeze. Now the snow clung to her like a shroud, each step a surrender to the earth's unyielding chill. The forest loomed, ancient sentinels of fur and ice, their branches heavy with the weight of forgotten winters. Elara's breath came in ragged clouds, her fingers numb as they clutched the necklace at her throat, a simple silver chain bearing a vial of crimson, the last remnant of her mother's lifeblood, spilled in a raid long ago. It was her anchor, that tiny relic, warm against her skin despite the cold, as if the blood within still carried the fire of the woman who had birthed her. "Strength is not in fangs or fury," her mother had whispered on her deathbed, "but in the quiet choices that bend the storm." Elara had clung to those words like a prayer to the goddess, even as the pack's scorn stripped her bare. The path downward was treacherous, a serpentine trail carved by avalanches and the paws of beasts long vanished. She had no map, no provisions beyond a heel of bread stolen in her haste. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but it was the ache in her soul that slowed her most. The raw wound of abandonment festering like an untreated gash. Why me? The question echoed in the silence, mingling with the distant uivo of wolves that were not her own. She was no warrior, no seer blessed with lunar visions. Her mind, sharp as a hidden dagger, had always been her secret weapon, weaving strategies in the shadows of council fires while others boasted of battles won. But in a world ruled by alphas and their primal might, intellect was deemed a Omega's curse, a whisper drowned by roars. As dusk bled into the sky, painting the snow in hues of bruised purple, Elara crested a ridge and beheld the valley below, a vast expanse of white unbroken, save for the dark ribbon of a frozen river snaking through it. Smoke rose faintly from what might have been a distant camp, but she dared not hope for shelter. The war raged beyond these mountains, a ceaseless clash between the northern packs and the encroaching empire of Ironclad, where kings and generals spilled blood for thrones of steel. Whispers in her old pack spoke of the Alpha King, Thorn Blackthorn, a monarch haunted by the ghosts of fallen allies, his once mighty legions crumbling under the weight of betrayal. But such tales were for the strong. Elara was adrift, a leaf in the gale. She pressed on, the cold seeping into her bones like regret into a guilty heart. The necklace swung against her chest, the vial's contents sloshing softly, a rhythmic reminder of loss. Her mother's blood, preserved by some forgotten rite, had never spoken to her in visions or dreams, yet it grounded her, a symbol of endurance amid erasure. Without it, she might have curled into the snow and let the night claim her, as so many exiles did. Night fell fully then, the moon rising like a silver eye, watchful and indifferent. Elara found a hollow beneath an overhanging rock, its shelter meagre against the wind's lament. She huddled there, drawing her knees to her chest, the chill painting her lips blue. Sleep evaded her, chased away by visions of the pack's fires, warm and mocking in memory. What strength was hers, if not the will to survive this desolation? The goddess, they said, wove destinies from the threads of suffering. But for one like her, unmarked by fang or fur, was there any pattern at all? A low growl pierced the silence, not from the wind, but from the shadows beyond the rock. Ilara's heart stuttered, her body tensing as she peered into the gloom. Eyes gleamed there, golden feral, yet laced with something deeper, a weariness that mirrored her own. The figure emerged slowly, a massive form cloaked in a tattered fur mantle, blood streaking the snow in his wake. He was no ordinary wolf. The air around him thrummed with the power of royalty, even as he limped, one arm cradled against his side. The Alpha King, she realized with a jolt, his face gaunt and scarred, the weight of crowns and corpses etched into every line. He collapsed mere feet from her shelter, his breath a ragged symphony against the ice. Instinct urged her to flee, to vanish into the night as the weak were wont to do. But curiosity, that forbidden spark, held her fast. Who was this broken sovereign, felled by foes or fate, and why did the moon seem to lean closer, as if to witness what fragile thread might bind them in this frozen nowhere? The wind whispered secrets through the pines, carrying the faint tang of blood, his perhaps mingling with the ghosts of hers. Ilara's fingers tightened on the necklace, the vial's warmth a fleeting comfort. In the silence that followed, she made her first choice, to watch, to wait, as the night unfolded its cruel poetry. The moon hung low, a fractured mirror casting shards of silver across the snow as Ilara's breath caught in her throat like a trapped bird. The Alpha King's form sprawled before her, his massive frame heaving with labored gasps, the metallic tang of fresh blood sharp in the frigid air. Thorn Blackthorn, his name echoed in her mind from the pack's fireside tales, a king whose roars had once shaken the northern thrones, now reduced to this, a wounded beast bleeding into the white expanse. His fur mantle, once regal and thick as midnight, hung in tatters, soaked dark with crimson that seeped from a gash across his ribs. The wound was deep, inflicted by claw or blade, and it wept without mercy, staining the snow in erratic patterns like the veins of a dying star. Fear coiled in Ilara's gut, a serpent ready to strike, urging her to slip away into the shadows where the weak belonged. She was no healer, no warrior versed in the arts of mending flesh torn by war. Her hands trembled as they clutched the necklace, the vial of her mother's blood pulsing warmer now, as if sensing the peril that mirrored its own origin. What madness possessed her to linger? Alphas like him devoured the fragile, their instincts honed to crush rather than cradle. Yet curiosity, that quiet rebellion against her exile, rooted her in place. His eyes, when they flickered open, golden flecked with storm grey, locked onto hers, not with the feral hunger she expected, but with a haunted recognition, as if the goddess herself had scripted this collision in the snow. Who approaches in the dead of night? His voice rumbled low, gravel over ice, laced with pain that twisted his noble features. He tried to rise, muscles rippling beneath his bloodied form, but a grimace felled him again, his hand pressing futilely against the wound. The air between them thickened, charged with the primal pull of Alpha and Omega, an instinct she had no wolf to temper or deny. It stirred something deep within her, a flicker of empathy, unwelcome and raw, born not from desire but from the shared sting of isolation. He was a king, yes, but broken, his aura dimmed by whatever curse or betrayal had driven him to these forsaken slopes. Ilara swallowed the lump in her throat, her voice emerging as a whisper swallowed by the wind. No one of consequence, just a shadow, fleeing her own ghosts. She edged closer despite herself, the snow crunching softly under her boots, each step a defiance of the fear that screamed retreat. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but it was his scent that overwhelmed, pine and iron, mingled with the earthy musk of exertion and despair. Up close, the scars on his face told stories of battles she could only imagine. A jagged line across his jaw from some ancient duel, another faint one tracing his collarbone, hidden now by the ruined mantle. He was melancholic royalty, his broad shoulders slumped not just from injury, but from the invisible yoke of guilt that bowed even the mightiest. Thorn's gaze narrowed, assessing her with the wariness of one who had been betrayed too often. An Omega, unmarked by fang or fur. The mountains devour your kind. There was no mockery in his tone, only a weary truth that cut deeper than scorn. He shifted, wincing as blood welled anew, and in that moment, the connection sparked, instinctive, unbidden, a thread of silver light in the darkness of their mutual ruin. She felt it in the quickening of her pulse, the way her fingers itched to staunch his flow, as if her mother's blood called to his, two rivers of red seeking convergence. But she denied it, rationalizing the pull as mere survival's delusion. He was danger incarnate, a king whose wars had orphaned packs like hers. She was exile, unworthy of even his fleeting glance. Yet the night conspired against denial. A distant uivo rose from the valley, not wolves, but the horns of pursuers, empire scouts perhaps, or rival alphas scenting weakness in their monarch. Thorn's eyes flashed with alarm, his body tensing as if to summon the strength of old legions. "They come," he growled, the words a rumble that vibrated through the snow to her bones. Fear and curiosity warred within Elara, twisting into something sharper, a reluctant alliance forged in the crucible of the moment. She could leave him to his fate, let the cold or the hunters claim him, and vanish into anonymity. Or she could choose, as her mother had taught, the quiet path that bent storms. With the resolve that surprised even her, Elara knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her own threadbare cloak to press against his wound. The fabric soaked through instantly, warm and sticky against her palm, the scent of his blood mingling with the faint, preserved tang from her vial. "Lie still," she murmured, her voice steadier now, laced with the strategy that had always been her hidden fang. "If they find you like this, even a king becomes carrion." His hand caught her wrist, not roughly, but with a grip born of desperation and something akin to wonder. The first crack in his armored solitude. The touch sent a shiver through her, not of cold, but of the forbidden spark, denied yet undeniable. The wind howled louder, whipping snow into veils that blurred the world, as if the mountains themselves sought to shield this improbable union. Thorn's breath steadied fractionally under her care, his golden eyes searching hers in the moonlight's glow. "Why aid a stranger who could break you?" he asked, the question heavy with the weight of his crown's curses. "Because mercy is the strategy fools overlook," Elara replied, her heart pounding against the cage of her ribs. In that exchange, the bond took tentative root, fragile as frost on a flame, born of fear's shadow and curiosity's light, a connection that neither could yet name. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow veiled their retreat like a conspirator's cloak, swirling in frantic eddies as Elara supported Thorn's weight against her shoulder, his labored breaths sinking with the crunch of their steps. The overhang's meager shelter had become a tomb in waiting. The horn's echo grew nearer, a relentless dirge slicing through the night, heralding the Empire's iron-forged hunters. She had no wolf speed, no claws to rend flesh, but her mind raced ahead, mapping the terrain in the moon's fractured light, a labyrinth of ridges and hollows where the unwary might falter. "This way," she urged, her voice a thread of steel amid the gale, guiding him toward a narrow crevice where the rock face split like a wound in the mountain's hide. The cold clawed at her lungs, each inhale a blade of ice, but the vial at her throat burned hotter now, as if her mother's blood stirred in defiance, urging her onward. Thorn leaned into her more than pride would allow, his massive frame a furnace of feverish heat against her side. The scent of his blood, coppery and vital, mingling with the crisp bite of pine sap from the crushed branches underfoot. He was no burden she could cast off. His presence thrummed with the raw authority of a king, even diminished. Pulling at instincts, she lacked the fur to answer. Empathy flickered unbidden in her chest, a warmth that warred with the chill of self-preservation. Why him? This sovereign whose wars had scarred the lands her pack once roamed, whose general strategies had spilled rivers of red without end. Yet, in his laboured silence, she glimpsed the fracture beneath the crown, eyes shadowed by ghosts, not glory, a melancholy that echoed her own exile's hollow ache. They slipped into the crevice, the walls closing around them like the jaws of some ancient guardian. Muffling the wind's howl to a distant moan, Ilara eased him down against a ledge of frozen stone, her hands slick with his blood as she rebound the wound with fresh strips torn from her cloak. The fabric was sodden now, heavy as regret, but it held, staunching the flow enough to buy time. Thorn's gaze followed her every motion, golden depths probing not with command, but a quiet vulnerability that unsettled her more than any roar. "You move like one who has planned battles, not fled them," he murmured, his voice a rumble softened by pain, carrying the faint lilt of northern courts, long besieged. She met his eyes, the moonlight filtering through the crack above like silver veins, illuminating the scar along his jaw, a mark from a betrayal perhaps, deeper than blade could carve. "Battles are won in whispers before the clash," Ilara replied, her tone measured, rationalizing the aid as mere pragmatism. To admit the pull, the instinctive tether forming between them, would be to surrender to a madness she could not afford. Omegas like her were tools, not saviors, kings like him, architects of ruin. Yet as she worked, her fingers brushed the vial, and a strange resonance hummed through her, the blood within seeming to pulse in time with his, as if two legacies sought to merge in this hidden vein of the earth. The horns blared closer, vibrating through the stone, and shadows danced at the crevice's mouth. Armored figures on horseback, their breath steaming like dragons in the frost, lanterns swinging to cast jagged pools of gold on the snow. Empire scouts, relentless as rust on iron, their scents, oil and forge smoke, wafting in on the breeze. Thorn tensed, a low growl building in his throat, but Ilara pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart beneath her palm. "Not yet," she whispered, her mind weaving the strategy that had always been her silent power. The crevice narrowed ahead into a hidden chamber, a natural alcove she had glimpsed in her descent, a fox's den expanded by time's patient erosion. "We wait. They seek the blood trail. Let the wind bury it." He nodded, the motion laced with reluctant trust, his hand covering hers briefly, a touch that sent sparks through her veins, forbidden and electric. The bond deepened in that shared hush, empathy blooming from the soil of their mutual peril. She saw it in the softening of his gaze, not the alpha's dominance, but a king's weary confession, the guilt that had driven him from his throne. "My generals plot with maps and steel," he admitted, voice barely above the drip of melting ice, "but they blind themselves to the human cost. I led them into this war, chasing shadows of vengeance, and now the empire closes like a noose." His words hung heavy, laced with the philosophy of one who had tasted power's bitter ash. What was strength, if not the choice to halt the blade mid-swing? Ilara felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders, mirroring her own scars, the rejection that had stripped her bare, leaving only intellect to armor her soul. Outside, the scouts dismounted, their boots thudding like heartbeats in the snow, voices barking orders in the guttural tongue of the south. One approached the crevice, lantern raised, the flames glow licking the edges of their sanctuary. Ilara's breath stilled, her body curling protectively near Thorn, the vial's warmth a talisman against the encroaching dark. In that suspended moment, curiosity yielded to something fiercer. A protective resolve, born of the pain they both carried. She was no wolf, but her strategy was a fang of its own, patient, unseen, striking when the foe least expected. The scout paused, sniffing the air, then cursed as a gust scattered fresh powder over the bloodied tracks. "Gone to the winds!" he spat, retreating with his kin, their lanterns bobbing away like will-o'-the-wisps into the night. Silence reclaimed the mountain, broken only by the distant weevo of true wolves, as if the goddess approved this fragile truce. Thorn exhaled, his grip on her hand tightening, not in command but communion. "You saved more than my hide tonight," he said, the admission raw, stripping away layers of regal armor to reveal the man beneath, marked by duty's chains, yearning for redemption's key. Ilara pulled back slightly, denying the surge of tenderness that threatened to overwhelm her, rationalizing it as alliance's necessity. Yet the bond rooted deeper, empathy forging links stronger than iron, two exiles shielding each other from the storm's maw. As the moon climbed higher, bathing their refuge in ethereal silver, Ilara traced the vial's curve, wondering if her mother's blood whispered of such unions, fragile proofs that even the wolfless could claim a place in destiny's weave. But doubt lingered, a shadow in her heart. Could mercy bind a king without devouring the giver? The night offered no answers, only the quiet rhythm of their breaths entwining, a prelude to revelations yet unborn. The chamber's silence deepened like a held breath, the moon's silver tendrils seeping through the crevice to paint their refuge in ghostly strokes. Ilara sat cross-legged on the frozen stone, her back against the wall, Thorn's form slumped nearby, his chest rising and falling in the uneven cadence of uneasy slumber. The vial at her throat thrummed with an insistent warmth, no longer a mere relic, but a living pulse, syncing with the faint rhythm of his wound's slow mend. Exhaustion clawed at her edges, yet sleep eluded her, chased by the night's revelations, the scout's retreat, the king's confession, the unwelcome tether weaving between them. Her mind, ever the strategist, replayed the evasion like a council map. The wind's timely gust, the crevice's shadow, her whispered calculations turning peril into pause. But beneath the triumph lurked a disquiet, a stirring in her blood that felt less like intellect and more like awakening. She traced the vial's smooth curve with numb fingers, the preserved crimson within swirling lazily, catching the moonlight in flecks of garnet fire. Her mother's blood, spilled in that long-ago raid, captured in a rite her kin had deemed folly, had always been a talisman of endurance, not power. "It holds more than memory," her mother had murmured in her final fever, eyes distant as lunar seas. "When the storm calls, it will guide the path unseen." Ilara had dismissed it as dying poetry, a comfort for the wolfless daughter who navigated by wit alone. Yet now, in this buried sanctum, the vial grew hot against her skin, burning through the chill like a forge's kiss. A faint hum resonated from it, vibrating into her veins, and with it came the first whisper, not words, but images. Flashes of steel and snow, banners torn under iron skies, the Empire's legions marching not with brute force, but cunning feints that her old pack's scouts had never discerned. Her breath hitched, the visions sharpening into clarity. She saw Thorn's war not as the tales painted it, a clash of fangs and fury, but a web of deceit, his generals, blinded by pride, charging into ambushes laid by Empire spies embedded in northern courts. Betrayals flickered like shadows, a rival alpha in his own ranks, whispering poisons to the wind, turning allies to ash. And at the heart, a key. Not a weapon or seer, but a strategy born of mercy, a path that spared the innocent by striking the serpent's head before the fangs fell. Ilara's hands trembled as she clutched the vial, the warmth spreading through her chest like liquid flame, igniting something dormant. No wolf howled within her, but this was her gift, the Pathfinder's sight, woven from her mother's blood and the goddess's quiet favor. It manifested not in claws or visions of glory, but in the unerring map of choices, revealing destinies hidden in the folds of war's chaos. Thorn stirred, his golden eyes snapping open, alert despite the pain etching lines across his brow. The air between them thickened, charged with the scent of pine resin and drying blood, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that peeled back her defenses. "What haunts you now, Shadow Walker?" he rasped, propping himself on one elbow, the tattered mantle slipping to reveal the fresh bandages stained faint red. Moonlight gilded his scars, turning them into silver rivers on a map of battles lost, his melancholy aura coiling around her like smoke from a sacred fire. He sensed it, the shift in her, the hum of power she herself barely grasped, his alpha instincts piercing the veil of her denial. Ilara hesitated, the vision still dancing at the edges of her sight. Rivers of blood diverted, thrones reclaimed not by slaughter, but by the mercy of outmaneuvering the foe's hidden heart. To share this would bind her irrevocably, elevate her from exile to oracle in a king's shadowed court. Yet the vial pulsed insistently, as if her mother's spirit urged confession, the blood within a bridge between their wounds. "It's nothing," she lied at first, her voice a fragile thread, but the words dissolved under his steady regard. Rationalization crumbled, the bond they had forged in flight demanded truth. Or everything. She touched the necklace, the vial glowing faintly now, a ruby beacon in the dim. "It speaks, not in growls or dreams, but in paths. I see your war king, not the blades and banners, but the lies coiled beneath. Your generals chase phantoms, while traitors feast at your table. There's a way. A strategy of restraint, striking the spies before the armies clash. Mercy as the blade, not vengeance." Thorn's breath caught, his eyes widening not with skepticism but awe, a king's recognition of destiny's hand. He reached out, his calloused fingers brushing hers where they cradled the vial, the contact sending a jolt through her, electric and profound. The touch amplified the visions, sharing them in a rush. He saw it too, the web unfolding. Her insight, the thread that could unravel the Empire's noose. "The Pathfinder," he whispered, the ancient title from lunar lore slipping from his lips like a prayer. "Born without fur, yet marked by the goddess's own blood. You are the key, the one who mends what my roars have rent." Guilt shadowed his features, deeper now, the weight of his past failures crashing against this revelation. He, who had led legions to ruin chasing hollow crowns, beheld in her the redemption he craved. Not a mate to claim, but an equal whose quiet power could end the war his might could not. Ilara pulled back slightly, the intimacy of the moment warring with her ingrained resistance. This gift, manifesting in the vial's crimson glow, elevated her perilously, from forgotten Omega to the fulcrum of fates. The moon watched through the crevice, its light bathing them in approval, but doubt gnawed. Was this union salvation, or another chain? The air hummed with unspoken philosophy. What was destiny, if not the choice to wield such sight for healing, not harm? Thorn's hand lingered near hers, not grasping but offering, his melancholy gaze pleading for the alliance her visions promised. In that suspended heartbeat, the bond solidified, empathy blooming into purpose. She, the strategy that could crown mercy over might, he, the king ready to yield his pride. Yet, as the visions faded, leaving echoes of blood and snow in her mind, Ilara felt the stir of deeper trials ahead, the confrontation with his betrayers, the moral crossroads where love might demand sacrifice. The vial cooled against her skin, its warmth retreating like a tide, but the revelation lingered, a flame kindled in the heart of exile. The night outside whispered of coming storms, weavers distant as harbingers, but within their refuge a new path gleamed. Fragile, redemptive, inevitable. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The crevices' shadows yielded to dawn's reluctant mercy, a pale light filtering through the crack like spilled milk on stone, as Ilara and Thorn emerged from their sanctuary into a world reborn in frost. The night had woven its fragile truce, but the mountains stirred with unrest, the wind carrying echoes of horns and howls that promised no peace. Thorn moved with renewed purpose, his wound bound tight, but his steps shadowed by the limp of old burdens, the tattered mantle draped over shoulders that bore the invisible scars of command. Ilara walked beside him, the vial at her throat a steady thrum, its crimson contents swirling with the residue of visions that had reshaped her exile into something perilously grand. The Pathfinder's gift lingered in her veins like a quiet fever, mapping paths not just of evasion, but of reckoning, the betrayals in Thorn's court, the rival Alpha whose whispers poisoned the northern packs, turning kin against king. They descended the ridge in silence, the snow crunching underfoot like brittle bones, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke. Ilara's mind raced ahead, her strategy unfolding in layers. Avoid the main trails where Empire patrols prowled, circle back toward the Silverfang's heart where Thorn's loyalists might yet rally. But doubt coiled in her chest, a serpent born of her past, the pack that had cast her out, the alpha mate whose rejection still burned like frostbite. To aid this king was to confront not just his enemies, but her own ghosts, the shame of being deemed wolfless, worthless. The bond with Thorn pulled at her, resisted and rationalized as alliance's necessity, yet it deepened with every shared glance, his golden eyes reflecting a melancholy that mirrored her isolation. He was no savior come to claim her. He was a mirror to her hidden strength, his guilt a confession that invited her own. As the sun climbed, weak and veiled by clouds, they crested a bluff overlooking the frozen river, its surface a cracked mirror reflecting the jagged peaks. Below, the valley teemed with movement, banners of grey steel fluttering in the Empire's advance camp, but nearer, a cluster of fur-clad figures, northern wolves, Thorn's own, gathered around a makeshift fire pit ringed by stones etched with lunar runes. Betrayal hung in the air like the tang of blood on snow. Among them stood Garrick, the rival Alpha, his frame broad and unscarred, eyes gleaming with the ambition of one who had feasted on the king's misfortunes. Thorn halted, his breath a visible plume, the growl building low in his throat like thunder trapped in ice. "My brother in blood, if not in loyalty," he murmured, the words laced with the philosophy of fractured thrones. What was kinship, if not the blade turned inward? Ilara's heart stuttered, the vial warming against her skin as visions flickered. Garrick's spies in the shadows, feeding secrets to the Empire, the war prolonged not for glory, but for power's grasp. Her old pack was there too, remnants huddled at the fringes, their scents familiar, pine and earth, mingled with the faint rot of her former mate's disdain. He who had rejected her, now allied with Garrick's treachery, his eyes scanning the bluff with the wariness of a cur scenting change. Fear and fury warred within her, the emotional texture raw, the cold wind whipping her hair like accusatory fingers, the distant crackle of the fire mocking her exile's chill. To descend was to face judgment, not just Thorn's court, but her own past, the pack that had left her to die. Thorn turned to her, his hand brushing her arm, the touch a spark that ignited the bond's deeper fire. "You need not walk this pyre with me," he said, his voice a rumble softened by guilt's weight. eyes searching hers with the vulnerability of one who had lost too much to pride. "Stay hidden, let me face the traitors alone." But Elara felt the pull, the moral crossroads gleaming like the river's ice. Love or liberty? Did the tenderness blooming in her chest demand she stand with him, risking the chains of courtly expectation, or flee to the freedom of shadows, preserving her solitary strategy? Forgiveness tempted a redemptive path where mercy could unmake the war's snarls. But war's call echoed in Garrick's distant bark, promising blood for blood. She chose, as the vial pulsed like a second heart, stepping forward into the open. "Strength is not in hiding the wound," she whispered, echoing her mother's ghost, "but in bearing it to heal." They descended together, the snow yielding under their steps, the pack's heads turning as one, shock rippling through the ranks like wind over flames. Garrick rose, his laugh a bark that split the air, flanked by her former mate, whose gaze widened in disbelief. "The king returns, dragging a ghost from the borders," Garrick sneered, his voice oily as forge smoke, claws flexing in the light. "And you, wolfless wretch, crawling back to taint us further?" Thorn's form tensed, alpha power coiling despite his wounds, but Elara raised a hand, her voice steady, the Pathfinder's sight sharpening the air. "Taint? You speak of betrayal as if it's a crown to wear." The words flowed from her, visions guiding like lunar threads. She named the spies, the hidden routes where Empire gold bought northern souls. Her strategy laid bare, not with roars, but precision that silenced the murmurs. The pack shifted, eyes flickering between loyalty and doubt, her former mate's face paling as she exposed his whispers, the rejection's sting now a weapon turned outward. Garrick lunged, fangs bared, but Thorn intercepted, their clash a whirlwind of fur and blood, snow spraying like shattered stars. Elara stood amid the fray, the vial glowing crimson in the chaos, her mind weaving the moral choice: call for slaughter, end the traitors in a crimson tide, or offer pardon, binding the pack through compassion's fragile chain. The bond with Thorn surged, his pain her own as claws raked his side, reopening old wounds. Love demanded sacrifice, her liberty for his redemption, forgiveness over the war that had birthed her exile. As Garrick fell back, bloodied but snarling, she stepped between them, voice cutting through the din like moonlight on steel. "Enough. The Empire waits while we devour our own. Choose mercy, and we strike the true heart or war and bury ourselves in snow." The pack stilled, breaths heaving in the frozen hush, Thorn's gaze meeting hers, gratitude and something deeper, a king's awe at the Omega who bent fates without fangs. Her former mate knelt, shame etching his features, the rejection's echo fading into regret. Yet Garrick's eyes burned with defiance, the rival's howl summoning distant Empire horns, the confrontation unresolved, a spiritual precipice where freedom tempted flight and love urged unity. The wind howled judgment, carrying the scent of blood and possibility as Elara clutched the vial, its warmth a reminder. Redemption was no reward, but a trial of the soul, demanding all she had left to give. What was power, if not the mercy to forgive the blade that scarred you? The moon, hidden now by clouds, watched in silence as the choice hung like a blade over the valley, poised to fall. The valley's hush shattered like thin ice under claw as Garrick's howl tore through the air, a ragged summons that stirred the distant Empire horns into a brazen chorus. The sound rolled down the slopes like an avalanche of iron, vibrating through Elara's bones and stirring the vial at her throat into a frantic pulse. Snowflakes danced in the gathering dusk, catching the first glimmers of twilight's crimson edge, as if the goddess herself bled light across the fray. Thorn stood poised, his bloodied form a silhouette of shadowed fury, golden eyes locked on the rival Alpha, whose betrayal had festered like an untreated wound. Garrick circled, fangs bared in a snarl that twisted his muzzle, his pack, swollen with opportunistic curs, flanking him in a semicircle of bristling fur and gleaming eyes. Ilara's former mate knelt in the snow, head bowed, but the sting of his rejection lingered in her chest, a cold ember, refusing to die. The pack murmured, a low tide of uncertainty rippling through the ranks, their breath steaming in the chill as the fire pit's embers spat defiant sparks. Ilara felt the weight of their gazes, pity, scorn, a flicker of awe at the wolfless Omega who had named their shadows. Her strategy had laid bare the web, Garrick's spies, the gold-laced whispers that had lured Thorn's legions into ambushes, the Empire's feints that turned northern valor to frozen graves. But words were fragile as frost, action demanded blood. The vial burned against her skin, its crimson contents swirling like a storm-tossed sea, visions cascading through her mind, not of glory, but sacrifice, the path where mercy spared the blade, healing the fractures before war consumed all. Love, she realized in that suspended breath, was no gentle crown, but a forge, tempering the soul through loss. Thorn glanced at her, his expression a mosaic of guilt and resolve, the scars on his face silvered by the fading light. "This ends now," he growled, voice a thunder restrained, stepping forward to shield her from Garrick's advance. But Ilara moved with him, her hand finding his arm, the contact a conduit for the bond that had rooted in their refuge, resisted, rationalized, now unbreakable. "Not with slaughter," she whispered, her voice cutting through the wind's lament like a silver thread. "With choice." The pack stilled further, the air thick with the scents of pine smoke, fresh blood, and the metallic tang of fear. Her former mate lifted his head, eyes meeting hers in silent plea, the rejection's echo twisting into remorse, a moral precipice where forgiveness could rebirth or doom. Garrick lunged, a blur of grey fury, claws raking the snow as he aimed for Thorn's throat. The king met him mid-stride, their bodies colliding in a crash that sprayed white powder like shattered stars, fangs snapping in the frozen air. Blood welled anew from Thorn's side, staining the snow in deep crimson arcs, the metallic scent sharp and visceral, mingling with the earthy musk of exertion. Ilara's heart hammered, the vial's heat surging through her veins, amplifying the Pathfinder's sight. She saw the outcome branching, vengeance's tide drowning the north in endless war, or a single act of restraint, severing the traitor's line without spilling the pack's lifeblood. Her mind wove the strategy in an instant, not force, but revelation, turning Garrick's ambition against him like a mirror to his sins. As Thorn pinned the rival, jaws inches from the throat, Ilara stepped into the melee, her presence a quiet storm amid the snarls. "Garrick!" she called, voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the cold wind whipping her hair like accusatory ghosts. "You chase thrones built on lies, but see the cost." The vial glowed faintly, casting ruby flecks on the snow, and she extended her hand, the visions pouring forth, not as commands, but invitations to truth. Images flooded the air, ethereal as moon mist. The Empire's true advance, not through brute legions, but poisoned wells and turned allies, Garrick's own kin, marked for sacrifice in the South's iron embrace. The rival faltered, eyes widening in the grip of unwanted clarity, the pack gasping as the deception unraveled before them. Thorn hesitated, his breath hot against Garrick's fur, the king's guilt flashing in his eyes, the weight of lives lost to his unyielding wars, the melancholy crown that had isolated him from mercy's grace. Ilara knelt beside them, her fingers brushing the snow-dusted earth, the vial's warmth seeping into the frozen ground like a libation to the goddess. "Choose," she urged, the word a philosophy etched in blood and ice. Power through compassion, or death's hollow echo. Garrick thrashed, but the visions held him, stripping his defiance to reveal the fear beneath, a traitor not born of malice, but desperation, orphaned by Thorn's earlier campaigns. The pack watched, breaths held, the distant horns growing louder, a dirge for the undecided. In that crux, Thorn released his hold, stepping back with a nod that cost him dearly, his frame shuddering from the effort, blood trickling warm down his side. Garrick rose, trembling, the fight leaching from him like colour from frostbitten flesh. "Mercy! For a cur like me!" he rasped, voice breaking on the unfamiliar word. Ilara met his gaze, the rejection scar in her soul aching, but she offered her hand. Not in absolution, but alliance. Mercy heals what vengeance breaks. Lead your kin to the true path, or fall alone. He took it. Claws sheathed, the pack erupting in a murmur that swelled to howls of tentative unity. Her former mate rose, approaching with bowed head, whispering apologies lost to the wind, but Ilara turned away, her choice sealed. Forgiveness not for him, but for the rebirth it forged. As the Empire's horns crested the ridge, revealing a vanguard of steel-clad riders thundering down the valley, Ilara's strategy ignited. With Garrick's coerced loyalty, the pack flanked the flanks, not in open clash, but precise strikes, cutting supply lines glimpsed in her visions, turning the invaders' momentum against frozen bogs and avalanches, triggered by subtle howls. Thorn commanded from the center, his roars now tempered by her insight, the war's tide shifting without the crimson flood his generals had demanded. Blood spilled, yes, hot and sticky on the snow, but measured, a sacrifice that spared thousands. The vial cooled at last, its glow fading as the last Empire banner fell, trampled under northern paws, the moon emerging to silver the victory's hush. In the aftermath, as the pack gathered around dying fires, Thorn drew Ilara aside, his hand enveloping hers, the bond blooming into union, not possession but partnership, two wounds mended in the forge of choice. "You ended what my might could not," he murmured, eyes soft with redemption's light, the melancholy lifted like fog from a thawing river. She leaned into him, the wind's caress gentle now, carrying weavos of celebration rather than lament. No wolf stirred within her, but the Pathfinder's gift had reborn her, from exile to architect of peace, proving love as proof, not prize. The vial hung still, a quiet sentinel, its blood a testament. Every Omega carried a strategy to heal a king's hidden fractures. Yet in the quiet, as embers glowed like captured stars, Ilara felt the spiritual echo. What was Renascimento, if not the ongoing trial of mercy's fragile flame? The mountains whispered approval, the moon a watchful eye, as destiny and freedom intertwined in their shared gaze. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.